The clinking of crystal champagne flutes and the polite, artificial laughter of high society filled the grand ballroom of the country club like a suffocating fog. I sat quietly at the edge of the head table. The thick fabric of my civilian trench coat kept firmly buttoned to my chin to hide the reality of what lay beneath it. Across the pristine white tablecloth, my sister Dana leaned back in her chair, her fingers draped over a glass of expensive vintage wine as she looked at me with an all-too-familiar expression of smug superiority. "It really is a shame you couldn't find a more stable, lucrative career path, Sarah," Dana announced, her voice carrying clearly across the table to ensure the surrounding extended family heard every single word. "While I've spent the last 5 years building an elite luxury real estate agency and securing a life of true wealth, you've been wasting your youth playing soldier in the dirt for a government paycheck." My mother let out a soft, dismissive sigh, nodding in agreement as she adjusted her pearl necklace without casting a single glance in my direction. "Your sister is right, Sarah," my mother chimed in, her tone dripping with a cold, passive-aggressive disappointment that had defined my entire childhood. "You missed our father's milestone anniversary party last year. You skipped Christmas, and for what? To sit in a cramped metal box out in the middle of the ocean? You always chose to be the difficult, distant outcast of this family, and it's honestly embarrassing to tell our friends that our eldest daughter is just a nameless public servant with nothing to show for her life." I didn't answer their insults, and I didn't let a single flicker of emotion breach the calm, stoic mask of my face, because the military had taught me that a true commander never reveals her strategy until the battlefield is fully prepared. Dana let out a sharp, mocking giggle, turning to her new husband and whispering something that caused him to look at me with a patronizing, arrogant smirk. They truly believed that my silence was a sign of absolute defeat, a quiet admission that I was the inferior sibling who had amounted to nothing in the real world. They had absolutely no idea about the grueling, secret discipline that had forged my character over the last 2 decades of my existence away from their toxic household. While Dana was sleeping in luxury hotels and using our parents' financial safety net to launch her superficial business ventures, I was surviving the most brutal environments known to humanity. I had spent my 20s crawling through the freezing, muddy trenches of elite training facilities, my lungs burning with gas and my muscles screaming with a physical exhaustion that would have broken a normal person within hours. I had stood on the freezing, pitch-black flight decks of massive aircraft carriers in the dead of winter, guiding multi-million-dollar fighter jets through blinding sea storms while the ocean raged violently beneath us. I had skipped family holidays not out of malice, but because I was leading high-stakes counterterrorism operations in hostile waters, carrying the lives of hundreds of brave sailors on my young shoulders. My body bore the silent, invisible scars of explosions, shrapnel, and grueling survival drills executed in remote jungles where the concept of comfort didn't even exist. I had clawed my way through the cutthroat, hyper-competitive naval hierarchy through sheer, unyielding intellect and tactical brilliance, earning the deep, legendary respect of the entire global military intelligence community. But I kept my accomplishments entirely quiet from my family, never sharing the details of my promotions or the highly classified medals that had been quietly pinned to my chest in secure Pentagon briefings. To my small-minded parents and my narcissistic sister, I was just a low-level pencil pusher who wore a plain blue uniform and disappeared for months at a time on government transport ships. They mistook my absolute humility for a lack of ambition, completely blind to the fact that the daughter they treated like an invisible failure had become one of the most powerful individuals in the nation's armed forces. The true depths of Dana's malicious jealousy, however, didn't stop at mere verbal insults delivered over dinner plates at family gatherings. As the wedding reception progressed, and the main course plates were cleared away by the waitstaff, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out an encrypted military satellite phone. A high-priority alert from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service had flashed across my screen earlier that morning, containing a forensic report that had frozen my blood with a dangerous, cold fury. The report revealed a massive, dark plot twist that my family believed was buried forever beneath layers of internet anonymity and spoofed digital networks. Over the past 6 months, as my name was advanced to the highest echelons of the Naval Promotion Board, an anonymous cyber campaign had attempted to violently sabotage my career. Dozens of highly detailed, defamatory letters and falsified digital files had been sent directly to the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Naval Command Office. The letters falsely accused me of selling classified maritime logistical operational data to foreign entities, abusing my command authority, and engaging in severe financial misconduct. The anonymous attacker had used advanced dark web routing protocols and burner phones to hide their identity, desperate to ensure that my upcoming confirmation before the Senate committee would be completely destroyed. But the attacker had made a fatal, arrogant mistake by completely underestimating the absolute, terrifying reach of the United States military's Cyber Warfare Command Division. Our forensic counterintelligence specialists didn't just bypass the encryption, they traced the physical hardware signatures and the digital metadata directly back to a single residential address. The malicious campaign had been entirely mapped, and the digital paper trail led straight to the personal smartphone and laptop computer registered under the name of Dana Caldwell. My own biological sister had spent her evenings attempting to get me court-martialed and imprisoned for federal treason, completely driven by a burning, toxic hatred of the possibility that I might succeed away from her control. She had executed this disgusting smear campaign entirely unaware of my actual, legendary standing among the highest ranks of global military command. She truly believed that the Navy would simply dismiss a low-level officer over a cloud of ugly rumors, never realizing that the institution viewed me as an irreplaceable national asset whose integrity was completely beyond reproach. As I stared across the table at Dana, watching her preen in her white silk wedding dress while laughing with her wealthy real estate clients, the final chains of familial guilt dissolved into pure, clinical ice. The time for quiet observation had officially ended, the battlefield was fully prepared, and it was time to unleash a spectacular public karma that would shatter their reality forever. I glanced at my watch, noting that the hands were crawling exactly toward the hour of 8 o'clock in the evening. Right on cue, the heavy, double mahogany doors at the main entrance of the country club ballroom were violently thrown open, cutting through the music like a physical thunderclap. The sudden movement caused the live orchestra to instantly freeze, their instruments falling into a dead, terrified silence as the wealthy guests turned their heads in absolute confusion. A sharp, synchronized click of combat boots echoed across the polished marble floors as a formation of men stepped into the blinding light of the chandeliers. The audience gasped in pure shock as 200 elite, heavily decorated Navy SEALs in full-dress white uniforms marched into the ballroom, their faces masks of pure, ironclad discipline. They were flanked by 4 high-ranking 4-star admirals and members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, their chests completely covered in vibrant rows of military ribbons and gleaming gold medals. The sheer, overwhelming pressure of their presence instantly shifted the atmosphere of the room, turning the lavish civilian wedding into a high-stakes military theater. Dana stood up from her chair, her face twisting into a mask of blinding irritation as she looked at the heavily armed security details framing the doors. "What is the meaning of this?" Dana shrieked, her voice shaking with an unyielding arrogance as she looked for the country club manager. "This is my private wedding reception. Who authorized these people to ruin my night?" My father stood up next to her, puffing out his chest in an attempt to project an authority he didn't possess. "Officers, you are trespassing on private property. Please leave immediately or I will contact local law enforcement." The lead 4-star admiral completely ignored my father's words, stepping forward to the center of the ballroom floor, his booming voice echoing through the silent rafters like a command from the heavens. "Detail, halt." The admiral shouted, and 200 elite warriors stopped instantly in perfect, terrifying synchronization. The admiral turned his eyes toward the head table, his gaze locking directly onto the far corner where I sat quietly in my civilian trench coat. "Hand salute," the admiral commanded, his voice filled with a deep, reverent authority that made the air in the room feel heavy. In that single, explosive cinematic second, 200 elite Navy SEALs and the most powerful military officials in the country snapped their hands to their brows in a flawless, rigid salute. They didn't salute the 4-star admiral, and they didn't salute the grand setting. Their eyes were fixed firmly, reverently on me. I stood up slowly from my chair, my movements calm, mechanical, and entirely graceful as I unbuttoned the cheap civilian trench coat and let it slide carelessly to the floor. Beneath the coat lay the pristine, gleaming white dress uniform of a full flag officer, the shoulders decorated with the brilliant, heavy stars of a United States Navy admiral. The rows of classified medals on my chest caught the bright light of the chandeliers, flashing like pieces of fire against the stark white fabric of my jacket. The collective gasp that erupted from the guest tables was a magnificent, breathless sound as the entire local community realized the true identity of the woman they had spent years looking down on. My mother's jaw literally dropped, her hands flying to her throat as she stared at my uniform, her face turning a grotesque, pale shade of ash. My father stumbled backward against his chair, his eyes bulging with a sudden, suffocating terror as he realized he had just threatened a full military flag officer with local law enforcement. But the most satisfying transformation occurred on Dana's face. Her smug, patronizing smirk froze instantly, her eyes widening in absolute horror as her mind struggled to process the sheer scale of the reality collapse before her. She looked at the 200 elite warriors standing at attention, she looked at the 4-star admirals, and then she looked at her biological sister, who was standing as the supreme commander of the entire room. "Sarah, you're an admiral?" Dana stammered, her voice dropping into a weak, pathetic whisper that completely cracked under the sudden weight of the panic. I didn't answer her question. Instead, I returned the salute to the formation with a crisp, razor-sharp motion of my hand, before lowering my arm to my side. At that exact moment, 2 officers from the Navy's Judge Advocate General's Corps stepped out from behind the formation, their faces cold and entirely devoid of human sympathy. They were accompanied by federal fraud investigators from NCIS, carrying a heavy, black leather briefcase filled with the complete forensic ledger of Dana's crimes. The legal team walked directly past my frozen parents, stepping up to the head table until they stood directly in front of my sister, who was visibly shaking in her wedding dress. "Dana Caldwell," the lead JAG officer announced, his voice smooth, chillingly professional and entirely clear so that every guest in the room could hear the indictment. "Under the authority of the federal government and the Uniform Code of Military Justice, you are being officially served with criminal charges for malicious defamation, identity theft, and attempted sabotage against a flag officer of the United States Navy. Our cyber warfare commands have fully traced the defamatory digital campaigns and the physical letters sent to the Pentagon directly to your personal enterprise networks and your home address. This is a formal federal summons, and a freeze order has already been executed on your luxury real estate corporate accounts, pending a full investigation into your digital communications." The officer quietly placed the thick, white federal legal documents directly onto her gold-rimmed dinner plate, right next to her untouched wedding cake. Dana let out a horrified, breathless shriek, her knees completely buckling beneath her as she dropped heavily back into her chair, the legal papers scattering across her white silk skirt. "Mom, do something. Please tell them it's a mistake." Dana wept hysterically, her weaponized confidence completely dissolving into a frantic, desperate weeping that made her look incredibly small. My mother rushed forward, her hands trembling violently as she tried to grab my arm, her voice suddenly shifting into a weaponized, weeping affection that made my skin crawl with disgust. "Sarah, honey, please listen to us." My mother sobbed, using a sweet, maternal tone that she had never once directed toward me during my entire childhood. "We are your family, your own flesh and blood. Dana made a foolish mistake. She was just stressed about her business. She didn't mean to hurt your career. Please, tell these officers to drop the charges. Think about how this terrible scandal will destroy your father's business reputation and our family standing in the community. We are so proud of you, Sarah. We always knew you were doing amazing things for our country. We were just waiting for the right time to celebrate your success." I stepped back, completely removing myself from her reach, my eyes looking down at her with a cold, calculating satisfaction that was entirely free of any remaining anger. I slowed down the pacing of the moment, letting the heavy, suffocating silence of the ballroom stretch out until the family could feel the absolute finality of my detachment. "You weren't waiting to celebrate my success, Mother," I said, my voice smooth, quiet, and carrying a strange, chilling peace that silenced her cries completely. "You tolerated my presence while using my absence as an excuse to paint me as the family failure, all to ensure that Dana could remain the golden child of your small-minded world. And you, Dana, you spent the last 6 months hiding behind a computer screen trying to send your own sister to a federal prison, completely driven by a pathetic, desperate jealousy because you realized you couldn't control my destiny. You thought you could destroy my future to protect your fragile ego, but you forgot that the institution I serve doesn't answer to the malice of cowards." My father stepped forward, his eyes red with a burning panic as he looked at the 4-star admirals standing behind me like a wall of unbreakable granite. "Sarah, please," he whispered, his voice rough and entirely stripped of the booming, arrogant authority he used to terrorize me with during my youth. "We will do anything. We will make Dana apologize to you in public. Just don't do this to us." "The legal process is entirely out of my hands, Father," I replied, turning my back on them without a single beat of hesitation or regret. "The federal government is the plaintiff now, and you can explain your concept of family loyalty to the grand jury." I turned toward the lead admiral, my voice taking on the sharp, resonant tone of absolute command. "Commander, dismiss the formation and secure the vehicle. We have a briefing at the Pentagon at dawn." Aye, Admiral," the commander replied, snapping into a final salute as the 200 elite warriors opened a clean, wide path through the center of the ballroom floor. I walked down the marble steps, my heels clicking sharply in the quiet room, my eyes fixed firmly on the exit as I left the wreckage of their toxic world completely behind in the shadows. As I stepped out of the country club into the cool, fresh evening air, the doors closing firmly behind me with a heavy, definitive thud, a profound sense of total liberation settled deep into my soul. The legal fallout descended upon Dana and my parents over the next 18 months with the inexorable, devastating force of a natural disaster. Because the forensic paper trail was absolutely flawless, Dana was forced to sign a formal, binding plea agreement that permanently stripped her of her real estate licenses and sentenced her to a substantial period of federal probation and community service. The massive public scandal completely decimated her luxury real estate agency, her wealthy clients fleeing the firm within days of the wedding journal exposing her criminal identity theft and defamation charges. My parents were forced to liquidate a massive portion of their private savings and retirement portfolios just to cover the astronomical legal fees Dana accumulated during her failed defense strategy. They became completely isolated outcasts in the very country club circles they had spent decades cultivating, their names permanently blacklisted as toxic liabilities who had tried to sabotage a national security asset. I watched this collapse from a safe distance, remaining completely silent as I assumed full command of my naval division, my life filled with true honor, purpose, and genuine colleagues who valued my character. If you are listening to this story right now, and you are the child who has been cast aside, ignored, or branded as a failure by the very people who share your last name, I want you to hear me clearly. Your worth is not defined by the absolute blindness of a toxic household dynamic, and your future does not belong to the people who only notice your presence when they want to minimize your intellect. Strength does not mean enduring emotional abuse or criminal exploitation for the sake of a fake family peace that only serves the parasites in your life. True power is born the exact moment you stop begging for the validation of people who trade love for jealousy, and you begin to use your own discipline to build an independent destiny. My military victory was a flawless, airtight execution of pure justice that permanently shielded my hard work from the hands of malice. But the true victory, the one that allowed me to stand on the deck of my ship every single morning with a peaceful, confident smile, was the freedom of knowing that I am enough. Home is not a geographic structure where you are forced to hide your brilliance to make insecure relatives feel safe in their unearned arrogance. Home is where your boundaries are treated as sacred, where your sacrifices are genuinely honored, and above all else, home is where you are respected.